but you would stop short of touching it again by a safe distance, doing this again and again until the pain subsides. This usually happens in less than a minute. If you got your fingers caught in a door, you would leave your fingers in place and repeat the movement of the door until just before it touched your fingers. If you stubbed your toe, you would repeatedly swing your foot toward whatever you stubbed it against, stopping short of contact. If you hit your finger with a hammer, you would swing the hammer toward your finger in the same way without contact. If you cut yourself with a knife, you would repeat the cutting action without contact. Of course, you would stop the blood flow first, if necessary. In all these cases and others, you would continue the repetitive action until the pain subsides. If, for any reason, it is impossible or inconvenient to interact with the original object that caused the injury, then you can substitute a different object to represent it, such as a free hand to represent a hammer or a knife, or a glass jar to represent a hot pot. The idea behind it is to create a new experiential memory in which the injury doesn't take place. The mental side of the technique is really the most important, because it's the mind that causes most of the ongoing stress. This consists of two parts, to be carried out as simultaneously as possible. One part is to bring all your attention into the present moment in which you are repeating the alternate, non-contacting action. The success of the technique depends primarily on your ability to keep your mind on what is happening and not on what happened when the injury occurred or what might happen as a result of it. Doing this well requires an act of will. You must choose not to think of anything other than the repetitive, non-injurious action you are currently involved in. If stray thoughts come in, don't get upset. Just choose to bring your mind back to the present as often as necessary. The other mental part has to do with using words to help maintain your present moment focus and to help your body heal itself. My students and I have experimented with a lot of word combinations, but the all-time favorite remains, "Nothing happened." See? Nothing happened. Repeated over and over until the pain is gone. This affirmation was first used spontaneously by a woman whose friend was cut badly on the forehead when he fell while they were both water skiing. In this case, the man was dazed and could not do anything for himself. So the woman held him up in the water with one hand and, while shouting "nothing happened," repeatedly moved her other hand toward his head as if it were the ski that had cut him. When they were back on shore after being picked up by a boat, the blood on the man's forehead was wiped away and there was no sign of a cut. The fact that the man was dazed obviously contributed to the success of the technique because his mind was not able to get in the way. Naturally, you can use any other words or phrases that work for you. The purpose of the words, remember, is to help keep you focused in the present moment and to give a clear message to your body, which reinforces its healing work. You may have noticed that several times I've mentioned continuing the process until the pain subsides. In most cases, this is all you need to do, because when the pain is gone, the mind gets occupied with other things, and the body can do the rest of the healing on its own. Often, in a very short time, and to the degree that you are able to keep your mind off the original trauma, the redness of burns fades away, and no blisters are formed. Blood stops flowing from a cut, and the edges mend. Bruises don't form discoloration from broken blood vessels. The more severe the injury, the longer or more often you may need to do the technique, simply because it's a lot harder to keep your mind off the event or off the possible consequences. You may also have noticed that I haven't mentioned the healing of broken bones yet. That's because this use of the technique deserves special attention. I wouldn't expect instant or even rapid results with a compound fracture. That is, when the broken bone has pierced through the skin. Even fast results are probably unlikely in most cases because of the degree of trauma and generalized stress involved. However, I would expect that using the technique to whatever degree possible would greatly help to reduce the stress and aid the healing. The technique has been used very successfully with simple fractures of leg bones, arm bones, and finger bones. Normal medical attention, if available, is always called for in such cases, and setting the bone, if appropriate, ought to be done whenever possible. Nevertheless, I'd like to share a story about myself in which this technique was all I had to work with. The event took place on a very strenuous hiking trip up the Wailua River on Kauai. On the return near the end of the day, I decided, foolishly, to take a little-used branch of the river by myself. In this part of the river there were no trails on the banks, and it was necessary to walk in the river itself, clambering over the rocks in the stream. I was wearing hiking sandals that had already proven themselves very slippery on the stones. At one point, when I was climbing over a boulder, I stood up and slipped off. As I came crashing down, I put out my right hand to break my fall, and the first 3 fingers crumpled under the impact. The pain was intense, and my fingers were twisted in all directions. I sat down and immediately began swinging my right hand downward to the boulder, without contact, over and over. At the same time, I shouted, "Nothing happened," at the top of my lungs and struggled to keep my mind in the present. It was a hard struggle, because images of the fall and remembrance of the impact kept trying to intrude, but I kept going for about 20 minutes. At the end of that time, almost all the pain was gone, and the first 2 fingers looked and felt normal. The third finger was straight, but swollen. I made my way home, kept up the work, and in 3 days my hand was completely normal. Curiously, a week after the event, I was sharing this experience with some friends when my third finger instantly became swollen. I used the technique again right then, and the swelling went away. Since that time, I've had to retrain my body's response to the event so that my finger doesn't swell up anymore when I tell people about it. So there you have it, a collection of my best ideas and techniques for healing yourself instantly, rapidly, fast, and any other way you can. The time limitations of this program preclude me from including many other techniques, so to get a more complete perspective, may I recommend you to the printed edition of Instant Healing, published by Renaissance Books. In closing, first let me remind you that almost certainly you won't have been able to take in everything I've said with a single playing of this tape. Listen to this program as many times as you need to absorb and understand the information, and make it your own to work with. Second, don't be discouraged if a particular technique seems difficult. These techniques won't necessarily be easy, because you may have a lot of resistance to changing your habits. Use your common sense when applying these techniques. If you try one and it doesn't seem to help, use another. I know I've given you a lot to remember, so let me now condense the whole thing for you, in the form of a simple Hawaiian proverb. Huaolo loko ike aloha. Healing comes from within, by means of love. Mahalo.